How's everybody doing tonight? You guys ready to get started? Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. We're so excited to be back here in the store hosting events. It's been over 2 years, and we're just so excited to see you all here. I want to thank you first of all for being patient and understanding with us as we host people back safely and responsibly. Of course, that's our first priority here. We're certainly working out the kinks and welcome any feedback that you might have about our protocols. Always. If you need sanitizer at any point, there's some at the front of the store. We'll also have some at the signing line. We ask you all to please keep your masks on throughout the duration of the event. Welcome to New Booksmith. For those of you who don't know, very excited. We're a 46-year-old independent business and a legacy business at that. We've been in the Haight-Ashbury this entire time. Some of you might know that we moved for the first time in 35 years just this past year, which was an epic feat. We moved all the books alphabetized down the street. That was very fun. So in a way, tonight ushers in a new era for Booksmith. Since moving Booksmith proper down the street. I want to begin with that in mind by just giving a shout out to the whole Booksmith staff. Thank you guys. They aren't all here tonight, of course, but the staff has shown up day in and day out to make sure that we can all still get our books, even when we couldn't get into the store, and also to make sure that this space is here for us now, that we all feel safe to gather again. I love bookstores so much, and this one in particular is a very special place to me. I think that we all probably know that bookstores are invaluable places, and if there's one thing that I have really learned throughout this pandemic is just that we really need to invest in the things that are important to us, or else they might disappear. And so I thank you all for buying Toby's books, for buying Nina's books. It helps support the authors you believe in. It helps support the stores that sell their books. So thank you all for your support. And hey, our probably all mutual friend Daniel Handler says that it is actually a crime to go into a bookstore and not buy a book, which we are not in the business of charging people for crimes, but that does feel about right. Again, if you have any feedback as we open it back up to in-person events, please don't be strangers. You can always reach me at events@booksmith.com. So I'm not going to say much about the book other than it's the second in the Unstoppable series after Dreams Bigger Than Heartbreak, which you can also get here tonight, and Charlie Jane will probably also be happy to sign for you. It's a tale of three extremely human heroes traveling through space whose friendship might just save the universe from fascists. Here to discuss it is Nina LaCour, best-selling and award-winning author of several books for young adults, including We Are Okay, which won the prestigious Michael L. Prince Award, Old Skill, which was the Williams Awards debut award finalist, and won the Northern California Book Award, and Watch Over Me, which was named the BuzzFeed Best YA Book of 2020. Mama and Mommy and Me in the Middle is her debut picture book. It's just out. We have copies here tonight. Her first novel for adults, Yerba Buena, publishes later this spring. Very exciting. It is available for pre-order here tonight. Nina loves cooking, gardening, and day tripping through ever-inspiring regions of Northern California with her wife and her daughter. Nina, thank you so much for being here tonight. Charlie Jane Anders, tonight's star, is the only person I've ever regularly traveled to see introduce other people. Her imagination is so wild, it's impossible not to be inspired by it. A friend of Booksmith and of bookstores everywhere, she is the author of Victory is Greater Than Death, the first book in the young adult Unstoppable trilogy that we're here to celebrate tonight, along with the short story collection, Even Greater Mistakes. Her other books include The City in the Middle of the Night and All the Birds in the Sky. Her fiction and journalism have appeared in the New York Times, The Washington Post, Slate, McSweeney's, Mother Jones, The Boston Review, Tour.com, Tin House, Conjunctions, Wired Magazine, basically all the places that you actually read. Her TED Talk, Go Ahead, Dream About the Future, got 700,000 views in its first week. With Annalie Dewitt, she co-hosts the podcast Our Opinions Are Correct. And so before I turn it over to Nina and Charlie Jane, I just want to mark this moment as the first event in our new space. There's actually a brief passage from the book that I think sums it up nicely. If I may, it's not a spoiler. One of our heroes approaches the queen in the palace of scented tears. The queen turns to the hero and says, and you have to imagine that I'm the queen here, and that this is your palace. Charlie Jane, you are the first person from Earth to enter this palace, and we could not imagine a better person to represent humanity. Everyone, please give a warm welcome for Earth Queen, Nina LaCour, and Charlie Jane Anders.
I'm so happy to be here. I was so thrilled when I learned that you were writing a YA trilogy, because I had followed your work and just known you as such an important literary figure in the Bay Area and such a champion of books and readings and writers. And so at that time I had only done YA, and I was just like, yay, she's joining us. But I know with the pandemic you weren't able to fully, like, I imagine, like, plunge into the world of YA and go to all of the places and do the big launch events and everything. So I wanted to, on this occasion, ask you, how has it been? How have you found YA so far?
I mean, it's been wonderful. I love the YA community. I love, just the conversations that you have in YA and the love of stories that you have in the YA world. And it's been so great. I have really missed a lot of, like, I was told, a few years ago, when you launch YA, you're going to do just a million school visits, you're going to, like, be talking to lots and lots of kids, you're going to go to all these things, and that really did not happen, at least not yet. And, like, I was supposed to maybe do some school visits this coming week, and I think they ended up not happening. So I've done some Zoom school visits, but I haven't gotten to actually visit schools or do a lot of the kind of the trial by fire rituals of YA, which I'm really hoping I get to do at some point, because I think it would be a lot of fun. And but I've been a fan of YA forever. I've been, like, a booster of YA for as long as I can remember, and I've always wanted to be part of that world, like, as somebody writing in that world. So it's been just such a thrill to finally get to be part of it.
Yeah, I hope that at least by the time the third book comes out, you'll be able to do this in person.
I really hope so. That would be so great.
Did you approach writing these books any differently from your books for adults, knowing that they were going to be mainly read by a teen audience, or just a lot will be read? So many adults read YA, so I don't know if that's actually accurate, but that many more teens would find your work since it would be marketed to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think I took kind of the YA audience very seriously, and, like, I had read a lot of YAs that I really loved, so I kind of went back and reread some of my favorite YAs and just kind of thought about them, and, like, I piled up on the floor, like, a whole bunch of YAs from, like, all different genres and different styles, and just kind of looked through them and looked at, like, the first few chapters and how they introduced the characters in the world and what they did, and I really thought about, like, how to do that in a way that worked. And before I even sold the book, I, like, was doing a lot of just, like, kind of research, I guess. And I tried to think about, like, how to adapt my writing style for YA to make it, like, a little kind of a quicker read, maybe, but, bring the emotion to the surface, but also have the same humor and the same kind of weirdness. And I kind of experimented a lot with how to do that. I wrote a bunch of different versions of that kind of style before I hit on one that I was happy with. And I was like, okay, chapters have to be much shorter, so I have a rule that, like, no chapter in these books is, they're generally between, like, 1,500 and 2,300 words, but they tend to skew shorter. They tend to skew closer to 15, 16, 1,700 words. And just, like, something interesting has to happen in every chapter, kind of. And it could be something interesting, like two characters have, like, a really meaningful conversation. It doesn't have to be something explodes. But I was just like, I want to have the feeling of things moving forward in a really kind of, propulsive way that, my adult work sometimes will have, like, a 6,000, 7,000 word chapter where it's basically just, like, people kind of having lunch and hanging out or whatever. And I was like, not going to do that in YA. I'm trying to make it kind of a little zippier, maybe.
Yeah, I love that. When I was working on my adult book, I definitely found myself thinking, like, oh, I can slow down. I get to, enjoy this moment a little bit. So tell us about the world of this trilogy. It's such an exciting world. It contains so much beauty and strangeness, and of course pain and kind of horrific elements to it. It has it all. And so I'm just really curious about how you came about envisioning and creating this whole world, and maybe explain what the world is like for those of our friends who have not yet read.
Yeah, so it is, this is like a space opera, and it's very much like, I kind of, when I decided to write a YA, or when I first thought about writing a YA, I kind of thought about, like, when I was a teenager, what did I really dream about? What did I fantasize about? What did I wish would happen? And what I wished would happen was aliens coming down and saying, you don't belong on this planet, come with us. And like just getting taken away from this very disappointing planet that we're on. And so, and so I was like, okay, how would that actually happen? How would that work? And so I thought about that for a long time, and I ended up with this kind of like building out this kind of space opera world. So I ended up with this idea of this person who was left on Earth as a kid, as a baby, disguised as a human, but she's secretly an alien, and she's a clone of this like epic hero, and when she's old enough, she'll regain all the memories of her past life and return to her life of being an epic hero. And she's just like, I can't wait, get me out of here, I'm ready, let's go. And she's just waiting for her destiny to arrive. And then of course it doesn't quite happen the way she thinks it will. But I had so much fun doing the world building and creating all these different aliens and all these different kind of creatures and all these civilizations and all these societies. And, I ended up with this thing where I was like, because, okay, in a lot of space opera things, there's like, in Star Trek, there's like Starfleet or the Federation, which is basically the United States of America. I mean, it's, more or less. And Starfleet is basically like the U.S. military, plus a little bit of like the U.S. police force. I guess they're police/military, but they do diplomatic stuff, so, and they do science. So, which obviously the U.S. military also does science and does. So anyway, I was like, okay, I wanted to create something like that, but a little bit different. So I came up with this idea of like the Royal Fleet, just because I liked how that sounded, and I wanted something with a little bit of pomp and circumstance to it. And then I came up with this idea that like, okay, it's the Royal Fleet, so what's the monarchy? And I decided that there's this like queen who's actually a cyborg, whose brain is connected to these ancient, incredible supercomputers that see everything. And she kind of speaks for these computers that are almost like oracles, and that she's kind of at the heart of the Royal Fleet and Her Majesty's Firmament, which is what the government of the galaxy is called. And I just built it out. And it was pretty obvious to me from the beginning that, and this is a little bit of something that comes up more in the second book, Dreams Bigger Than Heartbreak, it was pretty obvious to me from the beginning that if your kind of space organization is kind of inevitably going to be a metaphor for the United States, we're going to have to talk about some issues. We're going to have to talk about our failures and our attempts to police things that either we can't or shouldn't police, and our attempts to kind of exert control over things that we either can't or shouldn't control. And so it kind of became, especially from the beginning, I was already planting the seeds in the first book, but it was always obvious to me that there was going to be some corruption at Harvard. But I also, I'm battling now, but the thing that in the second book I was really excited to finally get to the kind of capital of the galaxy and get to visit like this incredibly super advanced city, which I decided was going to basically be a kind of post-scarcity world where you can have anything you want. And there's just like endless abundance and wonder, and everything is kind of almost like fairy tale because there's like a lot of holograms and a lot of computer generated stuff that can be kind of magical in a way. But, then you discover that there's a lot of corruption and terribleness at the heart of it as well. So, I don't know, that was a very long answer, but...
Yeah, I don't know how you would summarize the answer to the question. It's such a complex, amazing world. And one thing that I really want from the world is my own joiner, which is, maybe you should explain, but a little robot. They're very adorable. They have their own names. They text. One thing that I love about the texting is you don't have to actually type anything in. You can just think it, and the joiner will recognize and send the message, and I just love it so much. So that brings me to a question about technology, because technology is used in such an interesting way. Like, it's both wonderful and also, it's like it can be the best thing and it can be the absolute worst thing in this world, which I guess is true even now. But how did you think about the future of technology, and how did you just make the decisions that you made?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of thought one of the things that I think runs through all three of these books of like the Unstoppable trilogy, or I'm not calling it the Victories, Dreams, and Promises trilogy. One of the things that runs through these three books is the kind of thing of like knowing too much and having too much information and having too much just input, I guess, is like a thing. And like, because I feel like that is a very relatable thing right now for young people, but also for everybody. Anybody who's been living with the internet for a very long time is going to be kind of used to just being bombarded with too much information and having to sift through it and having to kind of create a coherent sense of the world out of just like a million data points that are being thrown at you all the time. And some of it's anecdata, and some of it's just like propaganda or disinformation. Some of it's just like random drama that people are deciding to pretend is like factual, but is in fact kind of counterfactual or whatever. I don't know. There's just like a flood of stuff, and not just on Twitter, but just in general in life. When you go on the internet, you are bombarded with just a ton of information, and it's hard to make sense of it. And so, in the first book, you have the thing where Tina, this is a bit of a spoiler for the first book, but it's not a huge spoiler. In the first book, you have the thing where Tina has like all the knowledge of this person that she was cloned from, but she has none of the memories. So she just has a ton of information with no context, which I feel is a very apt metaphor for the way we live. Endless information, zero context, zero way to make sense of it. And then, in the second book, you have the joiners, which are basically just like, they're like phones on speed or whatever. They're phones that can actually send like emotional content as well as messages. They're kind of psychic. They follow you around. They kind of connect you to other people in all sorts of ways. And they can just give you as much information as you could ever need. But, and they let you kind of customize the city. Like, it's like, well, I want to see this neighborhood, but not this neighborhood. But I don't want to be too crowded, so just screen out most of the people, which is kind of a fun thing. But then also, when you have Elsa learning to connect to these supercomputers, that's also about, like, having too much information. So I feel like that is the thing that I kept kind of noodling at in these books, is, like, just the feeling of, like, technology lets us access lots and lots of stuff, but it doesn't really give us the tools to kind of to make sense of it, or to kind of put it into any kind of framework.
Oh, yeah. You show that so well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned Elsa just now, and I just adore the cast of these books, and I love how in Dreams we're able to shift POV characters and get to know the others better. And so I want to maybe you can give a little intro to your characters, and then I have a follow-up question about Elsa.
Yeah, so we already talked a little bit about Tina, who's the main character of the first book and a major character in the second and third books. Tina is, she grew up expecting to leave Earth and go off and become like an epic hero, and she's been preparing for this for years, and she's kind of like a prankster. She's a little bit of like a, she likes to mess with people in a way. She likes to mess with people who deserve it. And then her best friend Rachel is a kind of artist who's like an extreme introvert and extremely shy and just needs to sometimes hermit. Sometimes at kind of inconvenient moments, she has to go hermit and just be by herself for a while. And like in the third book, she kind of does that in the middle of like a giant battle. She's like, okay, peace out, I'm gonna go hermit. She kind of just like disappears for a while. But and then Elsa is, she's one of my favorite characters that I've gotten to write. She's from Brazil. She has a travesti, which is, my friend Haley in Brazil, who's been helping me write this character a lot, the other day is doing some translations to and from English, from Portuguese, and she was saying, people often translate travesti as transvestite in English, and it's not. It's like a kind of trans-feminine person who doesn't quite identify as a woman, but definitely also doesn't identify as a man. And most travestis, I think, get some permanent body modifications done to make them more, to become more feminine. And it's a really like, it's a very different way of thinking about transness than what we have in the United States. And so Elsa is a hacker. And she kind of ran away from home after her parents found out that she was a travesti. And she ended up living in a hackerspace where they were kind of mean to her. And where she experienced a lot of sort of gatekeeping and kind of just downplaying of her abilities by these mostly cis male geeks. And so she's kind of traumatized by that as much as by anything else that happened to her. And and then there's like Damini, who's like this super kind of genius, but daredevil, risk-taking, puzzle-solving girl from India who has like major abandonment issues because her entire family kind of vanished on her. And Iwe, who's like a musician who also builds robots and who wants to kind of follow in the footsteps of this captain that he fell in love with in the first book, or who was his mentor in the first book. And then Kezia, or Kez, who's like a physicist who wants to be a diplomat because he doesn't want to make weapons anymore, wants to work on peace.
And they're also complex and just vibrant and lovable. I adore them. I was interested, I subscribed to your newsletter and for a while and just love it. And I was looking back to see things that you wrote about this novel, or maybe it was the first in the trilogy. But you wrote this about doing work about Elsa and doing more research. You said, when I got a reality check on Elsa, she immediately became more fun to write, not less. Both because she was more vivid in my mind and because she was becoming a more interesting character. Doing research, and especially learning from other people, almost always makes writing more fun in my experience. So I want to hear more about how research and reconsidering what you thought you already knew challenged you and invigorated you, and just tell us about that amazing craft element.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, I love talking about research. It's so funny because like when I was starting out writing fiction, like a jillion years ago, I had this kind of chip on my shoulder about like, I don't want to do research. I mean, because I'd worked as a journalist, I'd done nonfiction writing, and I was like, okay, I do research for my nonfiction, but for fiction, I get to just make stuff up and nobody can tell me I'm wrong, and I can just do whatever I want. And if I say it's true because it's my story, and whatever, screw you. And like, so I was like, I don't know, I had this idea that like, people were too obsessed with verisimilitude and accuracy in fiction, which I think is sometimes still true. People get nitpicky about random weird stuff, about like, there's no 12:38 train to like Northampton or whatever, and therefore this is a terrible story because they said the train left at 12:37 instead of 12:38. Like, people do get like weirdly obsessed with details like that, but at the same time, what I eventually came to realize, when I finally got a clue, is that I feel like when I'm writing fiction, my favorite thing to do is to use my imagination to conjure a world or whatever. And I found over and over again that the more my imagination has to work with at the start, the more fun it is to conjure the world in the process, because I have stuff that's just like, ooh, that's interesting. What would that be like? Oh, okay. Like, the more I actually learn about stuff, like the more true facts I learn about something, the more my imagination takes off, rather than it kind of bogging my imagination down in endless details and being like, oh, I have to get this detail right, I have to get this detail right. It actually goes the other way. I feel like my imagination gets like kind of fired up. It gets sparked up. And I found that specifically when it comes to the kind of question of writing the other, writing people who come from backgrounds or communities or marginalizations that are different from my own, the characters I write when I don't do my homework tend to be more boring. They tend to be boring characters because my imagination fills in details that are kind of boring, because I'm mostly relying on just like secondhand, third-hand stuff or stuff from the media. And it just ends up being like, that's the other thing, if you don't do your research, you're just going to rehash what you saw on an episode of Miami Vice back in like 1988, and it's going to be just like, whatever. So don't do that. So, I feel like the characters get more interesting the more real stuff you know about their lives, about the where they come from, or what shaped them, beyond like their, the stuff that you came up with. And then I feel freer to kind of create a story that's like, hopefully more unique. Like, Elsa is not in any way like representative of every travesti in Brazil. Like, she's a hacker who went and lived in a hackerspace and did all this other stuff. and she's got like a unique journey, but she's still grounded in this world that she comes from.
Yeah.
That was a very long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
Wonderful. Okay, yes, applause. Okay, so I want to talk about art because, well, it's a big part of these books. It's very interesting to me, and also I was thinking about near the beginning of Dreams, that amazing scene where Rachel is given a tiny red box, and I won't do spoilers, but there's something very miraculous inside of it, and Rachel can't make sense of it. And finally, Domini says it's art, which means it's kind of magic, right? And I love that, and I found it especially poignant because through much of this book, Rachel is struggling and is unable to make her own art, and that is a big piece of what book 2 is about. So tell us about art and creativity, however you want to, whether it's your life or in the context of this world that you are sharing with us.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously believe that creativity and making new things is an important thing that we can do. It's an important part of being human. It's an important part of what keeps us from just, vanishing as a species. And there's a line in the first book where Yato the Mantha says to Rachel to create beauty where none had existed is the most heroic act, or something like that. And I really believe that. I think that is an act of heroism. And I felt like, Rachel is a character who I didn't even plan on being in the books at all. I was just going to be like, oh, there's this other person who Tina, Rachel went through a lot of different iterations in the course of writing the first book. But then the thing of her being an artist and wanting to go into space and draw everything became an important motif and kind of ended up being the core of what happens at the end of the first book, and it ended up becoming something that I thought was really important. And I feel like the second book is really about struggling creatively. It's nakedly a metaphor. I talked before about how there's this thing of too much information. And I remember saying to my therapist a couple of years ago that I feel like part of what's going on in this second book that at the time I was really kind of struggling to wrangle into shape is that there's this idea of too much information and just knowing too much about terrible things that are happening everywhere that we can't do anything about, like Ukraine, all these horrible things happening, and yeah, you can send some money, but you can't actually go and stop people from committing atrocities on the other side of the world, or Yemen or a bunch of other places. But the other side of that is how do you keep creating, and how do you be creative, and how do you hold on to that part of yourself when things are really bad? And then of course I wrote this nonfiction book, Never Say You Can't Survive, that's kind of also about creating during hard times, and ended up kind of flowing into each other a little bit. When I planned out the second book, didn't know there was going to be a huge pandemic, didn't know a bunch of other stuff was going to happen, but I was already kind of thinking about things get really tough and scary, and how do we keep going, and what does it mean to be creative when everything is just falling apart around you? Is it even worth it? And if it is worth it, how do you do it? And so Rachel's story just became a really good way to talk about that. And it kind of, I don't know, it became sort of cathartic for me to think about it that way.
It was cathartic to read about it too. And yeah, I found that it resonated a lot during this time, but also anyone who has struggled, with some sort of artistic block in some way, I find that it's a very relatable and kind of comforting aspect to it, for sure. Okay, so I want you all to be able to ask questions too. So let me, I don't know, do you want to talk about terrible legislative things, or do you want to talk about love and optimism?
Oh, wow. I think you all know how I feel about the legislation in Florida and Texas and elsewhere about trans kids and about talking about queer topics in schools. It is revolting and awful, and I'm actually going to Texas in 2 or 3 weeks, and I was I had a moment of being well, I'm scared, but actually, you know what? I think this is a good thing for me to be doing right now, especially I'm going to go talk to librarians in Texas.
Oh, I'll be there too.
Oh, the Texas Library. Oh, we should hang out. Oh my God, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I was should I wear my angriest pro-trans t-shirts the whole time I'm in Texas? And I was no, I'm just gonna wear some really cute outfits that I look really cute in, so that people can see that I am that I'm living my life and not letting the naughty people, I'm trying not to curse, get me down.
Yes. Okay, yes. All right, love and optimism. So friendship, love, and chosen family radiate from these books. The characters care about each other deeply and root for each other and truly believe in each other. It's especially powerful because they aren't bonding over their sameness. In fact, they're from different cultures and countries, have different gender identities, are pursuing different passions and goals. You've created this beautiful blueprint of how to honor and respect and celebrate people for exactly who they are. The galaxy is in upheaval, but the teens are so gentle with each other, even as they're saving the world. And I can feel that vibe coming within this room so much too. So will you just tell us more about creating this kind of world in this book and maybe in this life as well?
Yeah, I mean, that was really something that especially in the first book, it was something that kind of emerged in the writing, but also actually the revision process. It was like, I think that there were versions of these books where it was more kind of like spiky and people being mean to each other the whole time, people like kind of negging each other or like having like, kind of tearing each other down. And it just, at a certain point, I was like, you know what, if we're going to spend this much time with these characters, I want them to see them valuing each other and loving each other and taking care of each other. And I felt like part of what really, as I was working on the first book, part of what really made it come to life for me was all the little moments where people take care of each other. And, just like the things that I decided to do because I'm a weirdo, like nobody ever touches anybody without asking permission first, except for during fight scenes. Nobody's like, can I punch you? Can I punch you right now? Which, I always have to add that caveat because that would be weird. But I just, stuff like that. I was like, I feel like especially right now, things are so scary and so bad. And like, just showing kindness and modeling kindness. And I was watching a lot of Steven Universe and stuff like that. And like, just kind of wanted to put some of that ethos into the books. And a little spoiler for book 3, because I just handed in book 3 the other day. And there's a part in book 3 where Elsa is feeling really bad and she's having to go someplace that she really doesn't want to go, and she's really scared and freaks out, and Rachel comes and just does a bunch of things for Elsa, but in particular she is like, you're going into this really bad situation. I designed a dress for you. And it's called a tactical ball gown. And it's a ball gown that has all these like silk grappling hooks, and it's like this beautiful piece of couture that's like, and then it's just like this thing that comforts Elsa throughout the rest of the book. She's got her tactical ball gown. And so I was like, that's a spoiler, don't post it on the internet. Can you post it on the internet? But whatever. It's on the internet. Whatever.
I love it, that's beautiful. All right, let's open it up to questions.
Hi.
You deal with a lot of difficult things in your books, and you always deal with them with an amount of hope and joy that I find enviable. So I'm wondering, how do you engage with the balance between anger and joy in your writing? Like, how do you draw that line? You go farther towards joy than most people do, and you make it work. Most people who go farther as far as you towards joy don't make it work as well, and it comes off cheesy, and you don't. And that strikes me as a very good balance between anger and joy. So is there any conscious part of that, or are you just awesome?
This is definitely something I've worked on for a long time, and I feel like, both of those things, learning to write anger and learning to write about negative, scary stuff is the thing that I really worked at. But also the other part, the joy and the connection and the positivity and the kindness and all of that. I feel like it was a process. If you read the stuff I wrote, which please don't, if you read the stuff I wrote like 15 years ago, it's very kind of cynical and funny, but in a kind of superficial way, and mostly just doesn't, there's not as much of an emotional core to it, I guess. And it was something I worked at for a long time, and I feel like it's still something I have to remind myself. Like, I will write a draft of something, and it'll just be like bitter and negative and hard, and I'm like, okay, this is this doesn't feel like enough of a story to me because I don't care. And I don't care about anything that's happening in here because it's just people like being horrible. And that's a legitimate type of story to write, but it's one that I find very hard to connect to as a reader and as an author. And it's just, I don't know, it's something that I actually have to kind of stop and think about, like, and it really does come back to partly, why do I care? Like, why does anybody care? Why do we care about these people? And I care about people who care about each other. I'm more upset when bad things happen to people who have seen experience joy and happiness and positivity, because then it hurt, I feel like it hits harder in a way. I mean, you know, there's a thing like certain TV shows, when two characters finally get together and they're finally happy together, you know one of them's going to die in the next 5 minutes. I'm not talking about that kind of thing, because I feel like that's cheap and manipulative sometimes. But I feel like who was it? Somebody said a few years ago that I don't trust any writing that doesn't have joy in it. I can't remember, it was some famous writer that said that, and I was looking for it recently and I couldn't find it. But I like that formulation because it's like, I don't trust it. I don't trust writing that is just like joyless. I feel like if you want to contain if you want to portray human experience, then you have to portray the nice parts as well. And I feel like, I don't know, it's something that I've worked really hard at, and I really appreciate you asking that. And I wish I had a better answer, but it's something like I'm writing a comic right now for Marvel, and I think this has been announced. I'm creating a new kind of trans superhero for Marvel, and and I was really going back and forth with my editor because I want there to be like scary bad stuff that happens, but I was like, every day I was getting more news about Texas and stuff, and I was like, there needs to be trans joy in this comic, so that if teenagers read it, they can feel like, yes, you are going to be okay. And so that was the thing that I consciously had to kind of pull back on, like some of the scary stuff, and be like, no, there's going to be some joy and positivity as well. And that was something I was like, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Gloria.
Hi. I don't know if this is so much a question as it is a comment.
Get out of here. Leave.
Not actually about the book you're talking about right now, because I've been having trouble holding it, so physically holding it, so I'm finishing it. But I'm getting there. I have a problem with silverfish in one of our bathrooms, and I cannot, before I kill them, I cannot stop but think about the city in the middle of the night. And how these creatures have existed for billions of years, the same way they are now. And
Wait, silverfish?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that.
not earwigs, like they smoosh into nothing. I mean, like the innards are nothing, basically. And every time I'm like, I'm really sorry. And I already felt that kind of just because they've been existing for billions of years as they are. But after I read it in the middle of the night, now I look at them and I think, what kind of civilization do you have? And that never stops.
I mean, yes.
Every
I mean,
every creature.
I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot. Like, how do we know, like, how do we define intelligence? How do we know to what degree we assign intelligence to other creatures? Are shrimp as intelligent as pigs? Should we eat either shrimp or pigs? I don't know. It's something that I struggle with, and I do actually. I'm an omnivore, but I try to mostly eat vegetables. But it is I think about a lot because it's increasingly clear that there are different types of intelligence that exist on this planet that are not the same as ours, but that are still valid. And I don't know. I mean, I definitely think it's something that I write about a lot. Emily writes about it a lot in their work, and it's a thing that a lot of science fiction is dealing with right now. I will say in the third book of the trilogy, I try really harder to get into the POV of some of the alien characters. Like, I'm like, okay, we're gonna have some alien POVs now, and just get into like how hard it is for them to be understood by humans and to understand humans, because I feel like the thing of like easy communication between different species it's a fun fantasy, but it also feels a little bit potentially toxic if we think that we can understand other species better than we actually can. So, freaking symmetrons, yeah. So in this trilogy, one of the things that happens in the trilogy, they'll just, in the Unstoppable or the Victories, Dreams, and Promises trilogy, there's basically a universal translator called the Every Speak, which is just like in Star Trek they have a universal translator, in Doctor Who, as long as the TARDIS is nearby, you can understand any language, any form of communication. And
The Babelfish.
what?
The Babelfish.
The Babelfish. It's like the Babelfish. And traditionally those things in science fiction are very hand-wavy. It's like, yes, I have a universal translator, therefore any language you speak to me in, I will understand it, and vice versa. And it's like, we don't question it too much, because if we did, it would completely fall apart immediately. And so in the third book, I really start just poking at it and kind of prodding it and being like, okay, how hard is it to understand someone speaking Spanish if you're an English speaker? Like, how many words in Spanish? Like, one of the things I did for this trilogy is I learned Portuguese, because Elsa is from Brazil and I wanted to understand more about her culture and watch a bunch of Brazilian movies and TV shows, so I learned Portuguese, mostly with Duolingo, but also with the help of my friend Haley in São Paulo. And I do weekly Portuguese lessons with Haley, and every week she's like, no, that's a false cognate. No, that's a false cognate. And I feel like false cognate comes out of her lips more than any other phrase, because there's so many words and phrases that seem like the same thing in English and in Portuguese, but they mean something completely different. And so, if you were speaking like Klingon or, Irigaean or whatever, there would be a bunch of stuff that might be seem the same, but is actually completely different. And so, I kind of worry at that a little more in the third book and make it into a thing. Because I feel like we shouldn't assume we understand other species or even other cultures as well as we think we do, kind of, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was very ranty. I'm sorry, very long.
That makes me around and think about it. It makes me think of a moment that I loved so much in Dreams, when Elsa encounters one of the aliens. And I love how she just kind of waits for the alien to act first, and the alien spits on the floor. And so then Elsa spits on the floor as well, and the alien says, finally, someone with manners. It's just so adorable and sweet, and it made me pause and think about, what if we did just approach other people and kind of follow their lead instead of imposing our own ways of, greeting and so forth on that. But it was just such a lovely moment.
I'm just thinking about something that relates to action to Annalie's work as well, that is the question of, I've got 2 kids who are young adults, and the weight of environmental catastrophe, and now we've got war, and we had Trump for a long time, and we still have various kind of political horrors going on, and sometimes we feel like we get the history we deserve, or we get the future we deserve. And you're holding out sort of the sense of we have a science fiction or a future that we need, but how do we get from sort of I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. It's just that between lost cities and a possible future, how do we get to the possible future instead of the lost cities?
I mean, first of all, so I should be restating the questions, I guess, because if are we recording this? Is this being recorded? Okay, so the question was basically with everything terrible going on, how do we get to a more kind of positive science fictional future in which things are better? And kind of talking about my work and Annalie's work, especially for Lost Cities. And I find For Lost Cities a very optimistic book. It's a book about survival, I feel like. You're going to tell me if I'm mischaracterizing your work. It's a book about survival. It's a book about how, things change, but we keep going, and how these cities actually weren't lost, and the communities remained, and the communities are still there. But I feel like, so for years, I would do panels at conventions and book conferences and events, and people would ask me about optimistic futures or about optimistic versus pessimistic visions of the future. And I always kind of responded, when you're asking about optimism and pessimism, especially about the future, which is I guess what they're usually about, sorry, that's a really silly thing to say. When you're asking about optimism and pessimism, you're really asking about human nature. like, are humans basically selfish and short-sighted and unable to kind of look past our own personal gain or comfort or whatever? Or are we generous and open-minded and able to kind of build and work together and so on and so forth? And the answer is clearly both. Yes, we're both. And like, it's really, it's really about like which kind of aspect of our nature or of our personality as a species is allowed to dominate. And I think that stories, like good stories, can help push us towards the open-minded, cooperative, kind of creative, generous side. I think that actually can make a difference, but I think it's just, the last few years have definitely been a roller coaster in terms of like seeing people come together and also seeing people be ridiculously selfish, just like ridiculously. So it's tough, and I don't have an answer. And I feel like part of the reason why I write fiction is because it's so hard to answer these things in nonfiction. It's so hard to write about the present or the future in like nonfiction. But in fiction, you can take a lot of liberties, and you can kind of show like it is possible for people to be better.
Yeah.
It doesn't even take like some major shift in our species. It just takes us trying a little harder, I think.
This quick follow-on is that one of the things I like in really good history is where we find out how we ended up here today as opposed to someplace else. Because so much of today feels like it's just a given. It just is the way things have to be. And clearly, the way things are today is not the way they have to be. It's just, there's much happenstance and chance in that as anything else. And so good futurism is also really important. So thank you.
Thank you.
We are at about 8:06.
Okay, so what do you think? One more question? One more question. Hi.
Hi. Super small, low gravitas question. I super vibe on the teenage/childish fantasy of aliens, come, let's hang out. I'm good, let's go to space. If you were in Tina's position, and any of the crew members was the one person who could fit on the little front of the meet, what would that conversation was like? Do you have someone that you were yeah, I hope we meet from Victory?
So you're asking which crew member from the Indomitable or the Starship I would want to come and get me?
Yeah.
Specifically? Oh man, I really love Yato the Mantha. I feel Yato the Mantha is this character who is the character who comes down to Earth and grabs Tina and Rachel and takes them away from Earth and kind of is their original kind of mentor / older sibling / best friend. And Yato has actually a bigger and weirder story in the second book, I feel than the first. But I love Yato. I find Yato very soothing, to write. I really enjoy writing Yato. And I don't know, I feel they would be just I would love to hang out with Yato. I would love to hang out with Captain Othar as well, but I feel Yato is of those characters on that ship, they're the one that I vibe with the most, I think, for sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. Oh my gosh. It really means a lot to me that you all came out at the middle of the end of the pandemic to come out with us tonight. The beginning of the middle of the beginning of the end.
Finally, I know where I am. Could not have asked for a lovelier crowd to come back into this space. Thank you all so much for being here, and let's give it up for Charlie Jean Anders.